You've just moved into a perfect American suburb in 1955. White picket fences line every yard. Children ride bicycles down tree-lined streets. Your neighbors wave from porches and invite you to weekend barbecues. Everything looks exactly as it should. But you know something they don't. The FBI moved into this neighborhood 6 months before you arrived. They've photographed every face at the local grocery store. They've cataloged which houses have basement lights burning past midnight. And now, they're watching you. Not because you've done anything suspicious yet, but because somewhere in a filing cabinet in Washington, your face matches a grainy photograph taken at a Soviet consulate 3 years ago. You've been trained for this moment. You speak perfect English with a slight Midwestern accent. Your identification documents are flawless. Your backstory has been rehearsed 1,000 times until it feels like memory. But here's what they never told you in Moscow. The perfect lie requires perfect performance every single day. And in Cold War America, one wrong word can make you disappear forever. You're tuned to the Velvet Obscura. Tonight, we'll look into one of the most dangerous roles anyone could play during the Cold War, the Soviet illegal, a deep-cover spy living an entirely fabricated American life. These weren't diplomats with immunity or agents who could flee to an embassy. These were ghosts who vanished into American society so completely that even their neighbors had no idea who they really were. If you're finding these stories help you drift off, I'd really appreciate a quick like or subscribe. It helps more than you know. And I'm always curious where you're listening from tonight. Drop a comment with your location. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We're exploring why you wouldn't last as a Soviet spy in Cold War America, and how even the most perfectly constructed identity could unravel in ways you'd never anticipate. The morning light filters through your bedroom curtains, and for just a moment, you forget who you're supposed to be. Then muscle memory takes over. You swing your legs out of bed the way an American would, not the efficient movement you learned growing up in Leningrad. You pad to the bathroom and study your face in the mirror, practicing the smile your neighbors expect to see. Not too broad, not too reserved, just the right amount of friendly warmth that says you belong here. Your real name doesn't matter anymore. You haven't spoken it aloud in 3 years. The name on your driver's license, your social security card, your bank statements. That's who you are now. According to your documents, you were born in a small town in Indiana that you've never actually visited. Your parents, both deceased, supposedly worked at a factory that did exist, though you've only seen it in photographs Moscow provided. You attended a high school whose yearbook Soviet intelligence obtained and memorized. You have a college degree from a state university where records show you graduated, though you never set foot on campus. Building this identity took years of preparation. Soviet intelligence services, particularly the KGB's first chief directorate, created an entire system for manufacturing American lives. According to declassified CIA documents from the Cold War era, the Soviets maintained extensive files on American communities, collecting birth certificates of children who died young, studying regional accents and customs, and establishing networks that could insert false records into legitimate institutions. The process of becoming an illegal agent often began a decade before deployment, with language training so intensive that agents could pass as native speakers even under stress. You rehearse your morning routine with the same careful attention you give everything else. The coffee you make is too strong by American standards, but you've trained yourself to prefer it weaker. The newspaper you read is filled with stories that make your stomach tighten. Senator McCarthy's latest hearings, editorials about the communist threat, advertisements for fallout shelters. You scan each article carefully, not just for information to report, but to understand how Americans think, what they fear, what they believe. The television in your living room shows morning programs filled with cheerful hosts and commercial jingles. You watch them religiously, studying the casual way Americans move and speak. You've noticed that Americans use their hands differently when they talk, that they maintain different personal space boundaries, that they laugh at different moments in conversations. These tiny details separate you from exposure more than any false document could. Your job provides the perfect cover. You work as a technical writer for a defense contractor, a position that gives you legitimate reasons to ask questions about engineering projects and security procedures. The KGB selected this career path carefully. According to historical research on Soviet intelligence operations, illegals were often placed in positions that offered access to sensitive information without requiring the highest security clearances that would trigger intensive background investigations. Technical writers, librarians, secretaries, and mid-level managers could observe and collect information that seemed mundane but proved valuable when assembled into larger intelligence pictures. Getting this job required yet another layer of deception. You fabricated work experience, created references who were actually other Soviet agents posing as former employers, and demonstrated just enough competence to be hired without standing out as exceptional. Exceptional attracts attention. Mediocre competence, reliable attendance, and pleasant demeanor make you invisible. As you dress for work, you select clothes carefully. Americans dress more casually than you learned growing up, but not too casually for an office environment. You've studied magazines and watched your neighbors to calibrate exactly how formal or informal to appear. Your tie shouldn't be too perfectly knotted. Your shoes should look well maintained, but not obsessively polished. Even the wear patterns on your clothing need to look authentically American. The drive to work takes you through neighborhoods that feel like stage sets. Neat lawns, American flags on porches, children walking to school with lunchboxes. According to historical accounts of the 1950s suburban expansion, these communities represented everything America wanted to believe about itself: prosperity, security, conformity, and shared values. For you, they represent a maze of potential exposure. Every person you pass might notice something wrong. Every conversation might contain a trap. At work, you maintain careful distance from your colleagues while appearing friendly. You join them for lunch occasionally, laugh at their jokes, ask about their families, but you never volunteer too much information about yourself. Your fictional childhood in Indiana remains vague enough to avoid specific questions. You mention no living relatives who might be contacted. Your hobbies are solitary: reading, listening to music, working on your house. Nothing that would require witnesses to your past. The office environment itself presents constant challenges. Americans have different work rhythms than you learned in the Soviet Union. They take coffee breaks, chat casually about personal matters, discuss sports and television programs with an ease that feels foreign. You've memorized baseball statistics and can discuss popular shows, but there's always a half-second delay before you respond, a moment where you translate not just language, but entire cultural frameworks. Your actual work, the intelligence gathering, happens in moments so subtle your colleagues never notice. You photograph documents during late nights when you're supposedly working overtime. You memorize lists of names and clearance levels. You note which projects are classified and which defense contractors visit for meetings. None of it seems dramatic or important in isolation. But Soviet intelligence doctrine, as described in declassified documents, emphasized that small pieces of information from multiple sources could reveal larger strategic pictures. Your job isn't to steal missile plans or break into safes. It's to be one thread in a vast intelligence web. Lunch breaks find you at a diner where other office workers gather. You order the same thing most Americans order: sandwiches, coffee, pie. You never request anything that might reveal different tastes or preferences. The conversations around you focus on mundane topics: weekend plans, children's activities, the new highway being built. You listen carefully, filing away information about how Americans live, what they value, what they fear. The afternoon brings a moment of danger so subtle you almost miss it. A colleague mentions a news story about Soviet spies arrested in New York. According to historical records, the FBI did conduct regular sweeps and arrests of suspected Soviet agents throughout the 1950s, with major cases like the Rosenberg executions in 1953 creating widespread paranoia. Your colleague watches your reaction as he describes the arrests. You respond with appropriate shock and condemnation, expressing the same outrage any loyal American would feel. But inside, your mind races. Were those agents part of your network? Do their arrests mean the FBI is closing in? Should you activate emergency procedures? You can't know. That's part of the isolation built into illegal agent operations. According to espionage historians, Soviet illegals often operated with minimal contact with handlers, sometimes going months or years with only brief meetings or coded messages. This isolation protected the network. If you were captured, you couldn't reveal what you didn't know. But it also meant living with constant uncertainty, never sure if your mission was succeeding or if exposure was imminent. The afternoon drags on. You type reports, attend meetings, smile at coworkers. Every interaction feels like walking on ice that might crack at any moment. You've trained yourself to appear relaxed, but tension lives permanently in your shoulders, your jaw, the back of your mind. During a break, you step outside for air and notice how the parking lot has filled with cars since morning. Each vehicle represents a person with a real history, genuine memories, authentic connections to family and community. You have none of these things. Your past is fiction. Your relationships are tactical. Your entire existence is performance. Sometimes you wonder what happened to the person you were before training began, before you memorized someone else's life story, before you learned to think in English and dream in a language that isn't your mother tongue. The training period in Moscow seems like another lifetime now. According to historical accounts from former Soviet intelligence officers, the preparation for illegal operations could last 5 to 10 years. You lived in special training facilities where instructors who had lived in America taught you to move, speak, and think like an American. You studied under former illegals who shared lessons learned from years of operational experience. You practiced your cover story thousands of times until the fabricated memories felt more real than your actual childhood. The psychological preparation proved as important as the practical skills. You were taught to compartmentalize your identity, to separate your operational persona from your true self. But the instructors warned that after years of living a cover, the boundaries between identities would blur. Some former illegals reported that they could no longer remember which language they had spoken as a child, which memories were real and which were implanted through repetitive study. You remember one instructor in particular, a man in his 60s who had operated in the United States during the 1930s and 1940s. He spoke English with a flawless American accent, used American gestures and expressions, even thought in American idioms. But his eyes carried a profound sadness. He told your training class something you didn't fully understand at the time. You will succeed by becoming someone else so completely that you forget who you were. And if you're caught, you'll discover that neither person really exists. You'll be trapped between two identities, neither of which can claim you. Back at your desk, you continue working through the afternoon. Your assigned project involves documenting technical specifications for a new radar system under development. The work seems mundane. Endless details about signal frequencies, component tolerances, power requirements. But Moscow specifically requested information about this system. According to intelligence doctrine, even technical details that seemed insignificant to individual engineers could reveal larger patterns about American defense capabilities when analyzed alongside information from other sources. You've developed techniques for memorizing information without appearing to study it too carefully. You read documents once, sometimes twice, processing information visually and verbally, creating memory anchors that will allow you to recall details later when you're safely alone. The human memory, you've learned, is remarkably capable when properly trained. Soviet intelligence schools taught memorization techniques drawn from centuries of intelligence tradecraft, associating information with visual images, creating narrative structures, linking data to emotional memories that anchor them permanently in consciousness. A colleague stops by your desk to ask a question about a report. You answer while simultaneously tracking how much of your current document he can see from his angle, whether your notes contain anything that might seem suspicious, whether your response time and body language match what an innocent person would display. This constant multi-level awareness, tracking both the surface conversation and the hidden implications, creates mental exhaustion that accumulates daily. Evening finally arrives, and you drive home through neighborhoods where families are sitting down to dinner. You park in your driveway and wave to neighbors who are watering lawns or playing with children. Mrs. Patterson from next door calls out an invitation to a church potluck this weekend. You accept with apparent enthusiasm, already calculating how to balance maintaining cover with avoiding the religious scrutiny that might expose your lack of genuine Christian background. According to historical accounts, American suburban communities in the 1950s were intensely social in specific, structured ways. Church attendance wasn't just religious practice, but social requirement and test of belonging. Community organizations, school boards, and civic groups all demanded participation. For Soviet illegals, these social obligations created constant exposure risks. Religious services required knowledge of prayers, hymns, and rituals that couldn't be perfectly learned from books. Community meetings demanded opinions on local issues that might conflict with Soviet ideology you'd been trained to believe. Inside your house, you finally allow yourself to breathe differently. The facade can relax slightly, though never completely. Even here, you assume potential surveillance. The FBI's counterintelligence capabilities during the Cold War included extensive domestic surveillance, wiretaps, mail monitoring, and physical surveillance of suspected agents. Your house might contain hidden microphones. Your phone line is almost certainly monitored. Your mail is likely being photographed before delivery. You prepare dinner, something simple and American. The Soviet foods you grew up eating would be suspicious to purchase regularly. You've trained yourself to enjoy hamburgers, meatloaf, casseroles, the bland efficiency of American home cooking. Sometimes late at night, you crave the flavors of your childhood, but that person doesn't exist anymore. That person died when you became someone else. After dinner, you perform the evening routine that defines your real purpose here. In your basement, behind false walls you constructed carefully over months, you maintain a shortwave radio. The equipment is sophisticated for its era, vacuum tubes and carefully calibrated frequencies that can receive coded messages broadcast from Soviet stations. According to declassified intelligence documents, number stations, radio broadcasts of seemingly random number sequences, were used extensively during the Cold War to communicate with deep cover agents. The numbers meant nothing without the one-time pad codes you keep hidden in your house, codes that translate numeric sequences into instructions or information requests. You tune the radio carefully, wearing headphones so neighbors won't hear anything suspicious. The broadcast comes through right on schedule, a woman's voice reading numbers in groups of 5. You transcribe them rapidly, filling pages with digits that will take hours to decode using your one-time pad. This method of communication, while tedious, was nearly unbreakable. Each pad was used only once, making cryptographic analysis impossible, even if the FBI intercepted the broadcasts. The decoded message contains instructions. Cultivate a specific engineer at your company. Attend a conference next month where you'll receive documents from another agent. Report on the new security procedures being implemented at your workplace. Nothing dramatic or urgent, just the steady accumulation of small intelligence pieces that Moscow will assemble into larger understanding. You burn the pages you used from your one-time pad, flushing the ashes down the toilet. The remaining pad goes back into its hiding place, a hollowed space inside a wall stud that would require destroying the house to find. You've prepared multiple hiding spots throughout your home, each containing different elements of your secret life: money, backup documents, alternate identity papers, emergency contact protocols. This double existence, surface normality, and hidden purpose defines every moment of your life. According to accounts from Soviet illegals who were eventually captured or defected, the psychological strain was immense. You can never relax completely. You can never be entirely yourself. Even in dreams, you must monitor what you say in case you talk in your sleep. Some agents reported that after years of living false identities, they sometimes forgot which memories were real and which were fabricated. The weekend arrives, bringing obligations you can't avoid. Saturday morning finds you at the church potluck Mrs. Patterson mentioned. You bring a casserole prepared from a recipe you found in a women's magazine, something reliably mediocre and American. The church basement is filled with families, the air thick with competing food smells and conversation. American Christianity presents unique challenges. You've studied the Bible and can discuss it adequately, but genuine believers possess an ease with religious concepts that's difficult to fake. You navigate conversations carefully, agreeing with generalities, deflecting specific theological discussions, positioning yourself as a private person of quiet faith rather than someone who wants to discuss religion in detail. The social dynamics of these gatherings follow patterns you've learned to recognize. Men cluster in one area discussing business and politics, while women gather separately to talk about children, recipes, and community gossip. This gender segregation reflects American social structures of the 1950s that required conscious adaptation. Soviet ideology, at least theoretically, emphasized gender equality in ways that made these rigid American divisions feel foreign and inefficient. You move between groups carefully, spending enough time with each to seem engaged, but not so much that you're expected to contribute detailed personal stories. The men discuss the new highway system being built, President Eisenhower's policies, concerns about Soviet nuclear capabilities. You listen more than you speak, offering occasional agreements and asking questions that encourage others to talk. Americans, you've discovered, often appreciate good listeners more than active conversationalists. The women's conversation covers different territory, but proves equally valuable for intelligence purposes. They discuss whose husband works where, which companies are hiring, which neighborhoods are growing. This social intelligence, who knows whom, who has influence, whose family has connections, creates a map of community power structures that Moscow's analysts find valuable. The personal details that Americans share casually in social situations would be closely guarded secrets in Soviet society. The conversations around you focus on topics that feel both mundane and loaded with potential danger. People discuss their families, their work, their concerns about the world. Several men mention communist threats and express relief that McCarthy and the House Un-American Activities Committee are protecting the country. You nod along, expressing agreement, while internally cataloging their names and opinions for potential exploitation. One man, a manager at a local manufacturing plant, speaks particularly vehemently about the communist threat. According to historical accounts, this kind of vocal anti-communism was common in 1950s America, driven partly by genuine concern and partly by social pressure to demonstrate loyalty. Public expressions of anti-communist sentiment served as a form of social proof, evidence that you were a loyal American who could be trusted. You've learned to match this energy in your own statements, expressing the appropriate level of concern and patriotic fervor that marks you as acceptably mainstream. A woman asks about your family background, where your parents are buried, whether you have siblings. These questions, innocent on the surface, probe for the exact details that false identities struggle to provide. You respond with your rehearsed story. Parents deceased, no siblings. You're the last of your line. The sadness you inject into your voice isn't entirely false. Your real parents, if they're still alive, believe you died years ago. Soviet intelligence required illegals to sever all contact with family, sometimes staging deaths or disappearances to explain the absence. Your mother might visit a grave with your name on it, never knowing you're alive and living a completely different life thousands of miles away. The potluck continues for hours. You eat small portions of various dishes, complimenting the cooks, demonstrating appreciation for community and shared meals. You help clean up afterward, carrying dishes and folding tables, performing the small acts of service that mark you as a good neighbor and community member. All while maintaining constant awareness of what you say, how you move, whether anything about your behavior might stand out as unusual. According to historical research, the McCarthy era created an atmosphere of suspicion and accusation that actually complicated Soviet intelligence operations. The widespread paranoia meant Americans were hyper-vigilant about potential communists in their midst, but it also meant the FBI received thousands of baseless accusations that had to be investigated, sometimes distracting from legitimate counterintelligence work. As a Soviet illegal, you exist in a strange paradox. Increased general suspicion makes daily life more dangerous, but the flood of false accusations creates noise that might hide genuine threats. A conversation develops about a family that recently moved away suddenly. The Hendersons, who lived 3 blocks over, apparently left in the middle of the night without telling anyone. Some people think it's suspicious. Others suggest marital problems or financial difficulties. You listen carefully, wondering if the Hendersons were agents like you, if their sudden disappearance means the FBI is making arrests you haven't heard about through official channels. This uncertainty haunts you constantly. You might be the only illegal in this entire region, or there might be a dozen others living parallel secret lives. You'll probably never know. The isolation protects everyone, but it also means living with questions that have no answers. Sunday brings church services you're expected to attend. You sit in a pew, sing hymns from the hymnal, bow your head during prayers. The sermon focuses on the spiritual dangers of godless communism, describing the Soviet Union as an evil empire that threatens Christian civilization. You listen to yourself being described as a servant of Satan, an enemy of everything good and holy. You maintain the appropriate expression of agreement and concern. After the service, you shake hands with the pastor and compliment his sermon. He's a friendly man in his 50s who takes genuine interest in his congregation. He asks about your week, whether you're finding community here, if you've considered joining the church choir. You deflect politely, claiming you can't carry a tune, turning the conversation back to him and his family. Americans, you've learned, are often happy to talk about themselves if you ask the right questions. The week begins again. Monday morning finds you back at your desk, typing reports, attending meetings, performing the mundane work that provides cover for your actual purpose. The routine feels almost normal now, almost like you really are the person your documents claim. But then something shifts. Small things, subtle things. You notice a car parked on your street that wasn't there before. A dark blue sedan with 2 occupants who seem to be reading newspapers but never turn the pages. The same car appears near your workplace the following afternoon, parked in a different spot, but with the same occupants. Your mail arrives slightly disturbed, as if someone opened and resealed it carefully, but not quite perfectly. Phone conversations contain odd clicks and delays that weren't present before. These could be paranoia. The KGB warned you about operational paranoia, the tendency to see threats everywhere when you're constantly aware of danger. But they also warned that dismissing genuine surveillance as paranoia is how agents get caught. You begin implementing counter-surveillance procedures you learned in training. On your drive to work, you make unexpected turns, watching to see which vehicles follow. You stop at stores and observe who else stops. You vary your routes and schedules, trying to force surveillance teams to reveal themselves through the patterns they must maintain to track you effectively. According to declassified FBI documents from the Cold War era, the Bureau's counterintelligence operations included extensive surveillance of suspected agents. Teams of agents would rotate surveillance duties to avoid detection, using multiple vehicles and operators who changed positions regularly. They would photograph suspects entering and leaving buildings, monitor phone conversations through wiretaps, and steam open mail to photograph contents before resealing envelopes. The techniques were sophisticated for their era, refined through decades of counterintelligence work. You spot the same blue sedan 3 more times over the next week, each time with different occupants, but always maintaining the same distance from your vehicle. Other cars appear in patterns that seem too regular to be coincidental. A gray Chevrolet, a black Ford, a white Plymouth. Each appears multiple times in different locations along your routes. The surveillance team is large, you realize, probably a dozen or more agents rotating to avoid detection. At work, you notice other changes. Conversations stop when you approach. Colleagues who were friendly become distant. You're excluded from certain meetings without explanation. Security personnel patrol your floor more frequently. These signs suggest the investigation has expanded beyond external surveillance to include your workplace. Someone might have reported suspicions, or the FBI might have shared concerns with company security. You maintain your routine while quietly implementing security protocols. You vary your routes to Sarsia, work, taking different highways and streets each day. You check for surveillance using techniques you learned in training, sudden turns, watching reflections in store windows, noting which vehicles appear multiple times. You begin to suspect the surveillance is real and extensive. The question becomes, how long have they been watching, and how much do they know? The isolation of illegal operations becomes particularly difficult now. You can't contact handlers to report the surveillance or ask for guidance. Attempting contact might lead the FBI directly to other network members. You can't confide in anyone or seek advice. You must make decisions alone, based on incomplete information, knowing that mistakes could destroy years of operational investment and potentially endanger other agents. At night, you lie awake calculating options. Continue normal operations and hope the surveillance is routine. Activate emergency protocols and request extraction. Attempt to lose the surveillance and disappear into a backup identity. Each option carries risks you can't fully evaluate. Soviet intelligence training emphasized that illegals must be capable of independent judgment in crisis situations, but no training can fully prepare someone for the psychological pressure of making life-altering decisions while isolated and uncertain. You review your operational security, mentally checking every action of recent months for potential mistakes. Did you say something wrong? Purchase something suspicious? Show interest in something that revealed your true purpose? The endless review becomes its own form of psychological torture, the impossibility of being certain you've been perfect every moment for months or years. A Wednesday afternoon brings the moment you've been dreading. You're called into a meeting with building security and two men who introduce themselves as representatives from a government oversight agency. They want to discuss security procedures for classified projects. The questions seem routine at first: how documents are stored, who has access, whether you've noticed any security concerns. Then the questions become more pointed. Have you noticed anyone showing unusual interest in classified information? Have any colleagues asked inappropriate questions? Have you been approached by anyone requesting information? The men watch your face carefully as you answer, looking for micro-expressions that might reveal deception. You answer smoothly, expressing appropriate concern about security, volunteering that you take these matters seriously. But you recognize what's happening. This isn't a routine security interview. This is an investigation. They're looking for someone, and you might be a suspect, or they might be trying to determine if you've noticed another agent. The meeting ends with instructions to report any suspicious behavior. You return to your desk feeling the walls closing in. That evening, you consider activating emergency protocols, dead drops where you can leave messages for handlers, signals that indicate you need immediate extraction. But activating emergencies when they're not necessary can destroy your usefulness and waste years of operational investment. According to accounts from former intelligence operatives, this impossible calculation, when to run, when to stay, caused immense stress. Running too early meant abandoning a carefully constructed cover and potentially exposing other network members. Staying too long meant risking capture, interrogation, and imprisonment. The decision required judgment that could only be made with incomplete information. You decide to wait, to watch, to maintain your cover while preparing for potential extraction. You begin slowly moving sensitive materials from your house to backup, locations. You memorize escape routes and contact protocols. You prepare yourself mentally for the possibility that tomorrow might bring arrest. Days pass without incident. The surveillance car disappears. Your mail seems undisturbed. Perhaps it was routine after all. Perhaps you worried over nothing. But the fear remains, a low-grade tension that never quite disappears. A Friday evening finds you at a neighborhood gathering, a backyard barbecue where men stand around a grill discussing baseball and politics while women socialize separately. The gender separation reflects 1950s American social structures that still feel strange to you, even after years of practice. Soviet ideology emphasized gender equality, at least in theory, and these rigid American social divisions required conscious navigation. The conversation turns to recent news about Soviet espionage. Someone mentions the Rosenberg case, expressing satisfaction that traitors received appropriate punishment. Others agree vehemently. You nod along, making appropriate comments about the importance of loyalty and the dangers of communism, all while knowing that you're exactly what they're condemning. This double consciousness, simultaneously being yourself and performing someone else, creates a psychological strain that's difficult to describe. According to psychological research on deep cover operatives, many experience dissociative symptoms, feeling detached from both their cover identity and their original self. Some reported no longer being sure which identity was real, which beliefs were genuine, which memories could be trusted. You excuse yourself and step inside to use the bathroom. While inside, you notice a photo on the wall, a family portrait of your hosts with their children. They look happy, genuine, settled. For just a moment, you feel something like envy. They live real lives with real relationships. Their names are their own. Their memories are genuine. They'll never know the peculiar loneliness of being a person who doesn't exist. The months continue this way. Work, church, neighborhood gatherings, secret radio transmissions, coded messages, careful cultivation of sources who don't realize they're being exploited. You develop a routine that feels almost sustainable, almost normal. You even allow yourself to believe you might be successful at this impossible task. Then comes the knock on your door. Early morning, before dawn. Authoritative but not aggressive. You look through the window and see men in suits with identification folders already open. FBI. Your training takes over. You feel strangely calm as you open the door. The men are polite, professional. They have a warrant, they explain. Just some questions about security matters at your workplace. Nothing to worry about if you've done nothing wrong. The phrasing is deliberate, reassuring, while suggesting they already believe you've done something very wrong. They ask if they can come inside. You have no choice. The warrant gives them authority. You let them in, watching as they spread through your house with practiced efficiency. Some begin searching, while others guide you to sit at your kitchen table. They offer coffee, a strange reversal where they act as hosts in your own home. The questions begin gently. Your background, your work, your relationships. They have files, you realize, thick folders containing information about you. Photographs of you entering buildings, records of phone calls, lists of people you've spoken with. They've been watching for longer than you realized. One agent, the older of the two leading the interrogation, introduces himself as Special Agent Morrison. He has a grandfatherly demeanor, speaking in a calm, almost friendly tone. His partner, a younger man named Coleman, takes notes but says little. The dynamic is deliberate, you recognize. Good cop presenting himself as reasonable, while his partner's silent presence suggests less pleasant alternatives. According to historical accounts of FBI investigations during the Cold War, interrogations of suspected Soviet agents often lasted for hours or days, with agents rotating to keep suspects off balance while building cases through careful questioning. The FBI had become sophisticated at breaking cover stories, finding inconsistencies, applying psychological pressure that made maintaining false identities increasingly difficult. They studied Soviet intelligence training methods and developed specific techniques to counter the resistance strategies illegals were taught. Morrison asks about your childhood in Indiana. The questions start generally. What was your hometown like? What did your father do for work? Where did you go to school? You answer smoothly, drawing on your memorized cover story, describing the small town you've never visited, the parents who never existed, the childhood you never experienced. But Morrison probes deeper, asking about specific details no file could contain. What was the name of the diner on Main Street where you said everyone went after Friday night football games? He asks casually, as if merely curious. You respond with the name you were given in training. Morrison nods, makes a note. And what did they serve? What was their specialty? You describe generic American diner food. Burgers, fries, milkshakes. Morrison's expression doesn't change, but you sense the trap closing. He's testing whether you know details that only someone who actually ate there would remember, or whether you're providing the generic descriptions that would appear in a training file. What about the smell? Coleman asks suddenly, speaking for the first time. You walk into a place every Friday for years. You remember how it smells. What did that diner smell like? The question catches you slightly off guard. Smell is incredibly difficult to describe convincingly if you haven't experienced it. You offer something about grease and coffee, watching both agents' faces for reactions. Morrison makes another note. They shift to asking about your high school years. What was your principal's name? What color were the lockers? Which teachers did you like? These are questions designed to catch fabricated identities, questions that require genuine memory rather than studied facts. You've memorized names from yearbooks, but the sensory details, the emotional memories that accompany real experiences, these are impossible to fully fabricate. You do your best, drawing on your training and improvising where necessary. But you can see them noting your hesitations, the moments where your eyes move in ways that suggest construction rather than recollection. Genuine memory retrieval creates different cognitive patterns than fabrication. FBI agents trained in interrogation techniques learn to recognize these subtle tells. The questions continue, ranging across your supposed life history. They ask about a specific teacher's dog, the color of your childhood bedroom walls, the name of a neighbor's daughter you supposedly played with. Some of these details were in your training materials. Others require invention. With each answer, you're never sure if you're confirming their suspicions or successfully maintaining your cover. After several hours, they shift tactics. Morrison leans back, his expression becoming more serious. You're doing well, he says. Your story is very consistent, very well prepared. The compliment carries an implicit accusation. Only someone who had studied a false identity extensively would be this consistent. They begin asking about your work, about conversations with colleagues, about questions you've asked regarding classified projects. They mention names of people you've cultivated as sources, asking about your relationships with them. How did you meet? What do you discuss? Why are you interested in their work? The questions become more pointed. They describe specific incidents, conversations you had, documents you accessed, notes you took. They've been watching closely, you realize, documenting your activities in detail. They reference dates and times, forcing you to remember what you were doing on specific occasions, weeks or months ago. On March 15th, you stayed late at the office, Morrison says, reading from a file. You were alone in the building for approximately 2 hours. What were you working on? You remember that night. You were photographing documents related to the radar project, but you respond with the cover story you would use, finishing a report, catching up on paperwork. Morrison nods, makes notes, but his expression suggests he doesn't believe you. Coleman takes over the questioning. His approach is more direct, less friendly. "How much are they paying you?" he asks bluntly. "What did they promise you? Did you really believe the ideology, or was it just about money?" The questions attempt to establish that you're a Soviet agent without quite accusing you directly. They're looking for reactions, for denials that might reveal guilt, or confirmations that might lead to cooperation. You maintain your confusion, insisting you don't understand what they're suggesting, that there must be some mistake. "We know what you are," Coleman says finally. "We have evidence, photographs, recordings, documents. We've been building this case for 8 months. Every conversation, every document you touched, every person you met, we documented all of it." The number surprises you: 8 months. If they've truly been investigating for that long, they know far more than you realized. They've probably identified your operational patterns, possibly other agents in your network. The investigation is far more advanced than you feared. The interrogation continues for hours. They never accuse you directly, never state clearly what they suspect. Instead, they build a web of inconsistencies and implications, letting you understand slowly that they know, or think they know, or want you to believe they know so you'll confess. In another room, you hear your belongings being methodically searched. They're looking for your radio, your one-time pads, your money, and documents. You've hidden them well, but FBI searches were legendarily thorough. According to accounts from the period, agents would dismantle entire houses, searching inside walls, under floorboards, in plumbing fixtures. As afternoon arrives, an agent makes you an offer. "They know what you are," he explains. "They have evidence, witnesses, surveillance records, but they're not interested in you specifically. They want the network. They want names, procedures, contacts. In exchange, they can offer protection, relocation, a new identity. You could disappear into America legitimately instead of waiting for the inevitable arrest and trial." This is the moment every illegal fears. Defection offers survival, but requires betraying everything: your country, your mission, other agents who trusted the network's security. Refusing means facing trial, almost certain conviction, potentially decades in prison, or even execution for espionage during wartime conditions. You understand that this choice, this impossible calculation, is where your journey ends, regardless of which option you select. If you cooperate, you'll vanish into protective custody, given a new identity, and relocated somewhere far from this suburb where you tried to build a false life. You'll spend the rest of your life wondering if the FBI truly protected you, or if Soviet intelligence will eventually locate you for punishment. If you refuse, you'll face the American legal system. According to historical records, Soviet illegals who were arrested during the Cold War typically received harsh sentences. The Rosenberg executions in 1953 established that espionage could be a capital offense. Even without execution, sentences of 20, 30, or 40 years were common. You'd be imprisoned in a foreign country, cut off from everything familiar, aging in a cell, while the world outside changed in ways you'd never witness. The interrogation continues, but you recognize that the real decision has already been made. The moment they knocked on your door, your life as you knew it ended. Whether you confess or remain silent, whether you cooperate or resist, you're about to disappear. Not dramatically, not with headlines or public acknowledgement. You'll simply cease to exist as the person your neighbors knew. According to historical accounts, this is often how these cases ended. Suburban neighbors would wake up one morning to find a house empty, a family gone without explanation. Sometimes the FBI would create cover stories, job transfers, family emergencies, voluntary relocations. Other times, houses would simply be emptied and sold, with no explanation offered to curious neighbors. The people you worked with, went to church with, smiled at across backyard fences. They'll never know the truth. They'll wonder, perhaps, what happened. They'll speculate about sudden departures and strange circumstances. But the real story, the truth about who you were and why you were there, will remain classified for decades. Some of your neighbors might feel betrayed if they eventually learn the truth years later when documents are declassified or memoirs are published. The friendly neighbor who brought casseroles and attended church was a lie, a performance designed to exploit their trust. Others might feel frightened, realizing how thoroughly they were deceived, how their community had been infiltrated by someone whose entire existence was fabricated. As evening approaches, you're transported from your home. The house you maintained so carefully will be searched for weeks, every wall examined, every possession catalogued. Your colleagues will be interviewed, your relationships investigated. The FBI will build a comprehensive picture of your operation, though pieces will remain forever mysterious. Did you successfully pass information that harmed American interests? Did Moscow receive valuable intelligence because of your work? Or were you identified early and fed misleading information while the FBI watched and learned? You'll probably never know the answer. That's part of the unique tragedy of intelligence work during the Cold War. Successes and failures remained classified. Agents lived and died without knowing if their sacrifices mattered, if their work changed anything, if the risks were worth the results. The psychological impact of this uncertainty, combined with the stress of maintaining false identities, created damage that often lasted lifetimes. Former Soviet illegals who eventually returned to Russia or defected to the West reported depression, anxiety, identity confusion, and difficulty forming genuine relationships. Some never fully recovered their sense of self after years of being someone else. Your case will become a file, a case number in FBI records, perhaps a brief mention in classified reports. Intelligence historians might encounter your story decades later while researching the Cold War, finding coded references to an illegal agent arrested in a Midwestern suburb. But your name, both the real one you were born with and the false one you lived under, will remain classified, protected by laws designed to shield intelligence operations and protect agents who cooperated. The Cold War era of illegal agents represents a unique form of human sacrifice. Unlike soldiers who received recognition or diplomats who enjoyed status, illegals vanished into fabricated lives, achieving at most anonymous effectiveness. Many spent years building covers that were then burned through circumstances beyond their control, defectors who revealed names, technical breakthroughs that broke codes, simple bad luck that placed them under surveillance at crucial moments. According to research on Soviet intelligence operations, the KGB deployed hundreds of illegals into Western countries during the Cold War. Some operated successfully for decades before retirement. Others were identified and arrested within months. A few were never identified and died having successfully maintained their covers until the end. The exact numbers remain classified in both Russian and American archives, but historians estimate that several dozen Soviet illegals were operating in the United States at any given time during the Cold War's peak years. Your story, this journey from assumed identity through daily deception to eventual exposure, played out in variations across America during those tense decades. Different suburbs, different covers, different endings. But the essential experience remained constant. The impossible burden of living a complete lie while surrounded by people who believed they knew you. The morning after your arrest, Your neighbors wake to find your house cordoned off. Some FBI vehicles remain parked outside while the search continues. Children are told not to play nearby. Neighbors gather in clusters, whispering speculation. By afternoon, the official story will circulate. Something vague about legal troubles, about irregularities in your background that required investigation. The truth will remain hidden behind classifications and official silence. Mrs. Patterson, who invited you to church potlucks and considered you a friend, will feel confused and betrayed. She'll replay conversations, looking for signs she missed, wondering if anything about you was genuine. She'll mention to other neighbors that you always seemed slightly distant, though she couldn't quite articulate how. Others will claim they always knew something was wrong, rewriting their memories to include suspicions they never actually felt. Within weeks, a new family will move into your house. They'll repaint walls, replace fixtures, make the space their own. Any physical traces of your presence will disappear. Within months, the neighborhood will move on, your brief presence fading into local legend. Remember that family that turned out to be something suspicious. Within years, new residents won't know the story at all. This erasure, this methodical removal of any evidence you existed, represents the final chapter of your disappearance. You vanished first from your original identity when you became an illegal. You vanished again when arrested and removed from your cover life. And you vanish finally from collective memory as time passes and people forget. The implications of your story extend beyond personal tragedy. Every illegal agent represented a failure of one country's security and success of another's intelligence operations. Your insertion into American society demonstrated Soviet capabilities to create convincing false identities and infiltrate secure facilities. Your eventual arrest demonstrated American counterintelligence effectiveness in identifying and neutralizing these threats. According to Cold War historians, the illegal agent programs run by both sides created a strange shadow war where the front lines existed in suburban homes and office buildings. This secret conflict produced no dramatic battles, but it shaped the larger geopolitical struggle in ways that only became apparent years later when classified decisions were revealed to have been influenced by intelligence from deep cover sources. The scale of these operations was remarkable. Declassified Soviet documents suggest that during the Cold War's peak years, the KGB maintained several hundred illegals in various Western countries, with perhaps 50 to 100 operating in the United States at any given time. The FBI's counterintelligence division dedicated enormous resources to identifying and monitoring these agents, employing thousands of personnel in surveillance, investigation, and analysis roles. The techniques used by both sides evolved constantly. Soviet intelligence developed increasingly sophisticated methods for creating false identities, including obtaining genuine birth certificates of deceased children, establishing legends, cover stories, through years of careful documentation, and training agents in psychological techniques to maintain cover under stress. The FBI countered with advanced surveillance technology, computer databases for cross-referencing information, and behavioral analysis techniques to identify inconsistencies in cover stories. The human cost of these operations extended beyond the agents themselves. Families in the Soviet Union often didn't know what happened to relatives who were deployed as illegals. Communication was impossible for security reasons, and if agents were captured, their families might never learn their fate. Some families spent decades wondering, hoping for news that never came. Others eventually received vague notifications of death in service to the state, with no details about when, where, or how. According to memoirs published by former KGB officers after the Cold War ended, the selection process for illegal agents was rigorous and psychologically demanding. Candidates underwent years of evaluation to identify those with the mental resilience to maintain false identities, the language aptitude to pass as native speakers, and the ideological commitment to endure the isolation of deep cover operations. Many candidates failed during training, unable to manage the psychological stress of abandoning their true identities. The training facilities themselves were elaborate simulations of American life. The KGB maintained entire mock American towns where trainees lived for months or years, practicing their covers in controlled environments before deployment. These facilities included American-style houses, stores, schools, and community centers, where instructors created situations that tested trainees' ability to think and react as Americans would. Similarly, American families whose relatives were recruited by Soviet intelligence often never knew the truth. Neighbors, friends, and co-workers who had no involvement in espionage might find themselves under suspicion simply because of association. The paranoia created by counterintelligence investigations damaged relationships and communities, creating suspicion that lingered long after specific cases were closed. The FBI's counterintelligence operations during this period were massive in scope. The security index maintained by the FBI contained names of thousands of individuals considered potential security risks, including suspected Soviet agents, Communist Party members, and those with connections to leftist organizations. Many of these individuals were monitored for years without ever being charged with crimes, their lives disrupted by investigations that found no evidence of actual espionage. The legal framework surrounding these operations created complex ethical questions. Soviet illegals who were arrested faced prosecution under espionage laws that could result in execution or life imprisonment. The Rosenberg case in 1953 established that espionage could be a capital offense, creating a precedent that shaped subsequent prosecutions. However, the classified nature of counterintelligence operations meant that many arrests were never publicly disclosed, with suspects disappearing into federal custody without public trial or acknowledgement. Some cases never resulted in prosecution at all. The FBI sometimes chose to monitor identified agents rather than arrest them, using their knowledge of Soviet operations to feed misinformation back to Moscow or to identify other network members. This cat-and-mouse game meant that some illegals operated for decades under FBI surveillance, never knowing their cover had been compromised, continuing to report information that American intelligence agencies carefully controlled. The psychological research conducted on former intelligence operatives reveals lasting impacts on identity and mental health. Living a fabricated identity for years creates cognitive dissonance that doesn't simply disappear when the cover is broken. Some former illegals reported feeling like they had become the cover identity, losing connection to their original selves. Others felt they had never truly been either person, existing instead in a liminal space between identities. Dr. Philip Agee, a former CIA officer who studied the psychological impacts of intelligence work, noted in his research that deep cover operatives frequently experienced what he termed identity fracture, a fragmentation of self that occurred when the demands of maintaining a false identity conflicted with core personality traits and values. This fracture could manifest as depression, anxiety disorders, dissociative symptoms, and difficulty forming genuine relationships even after operations ended. The ethical implications of illegal agent operations remain debated by historians and intelligence professionals. On one hand, these operations represent espionage tactics used by nations throughout history, gathering information to protect national interests. Intelligence gathering has always been considered a legitimate activity in international relations, with most nations maintaining intelligence services and conducting covert operations. On the other hand, these operations involve creating elaborate deceptions that exploit the trust of ordinary people who have no role in international conflicts. The neighbors who befriended you, the co-workers who shared confidences, the church members who welcomed you into their community, all were deceived and potentially placed at risk through association with someone under investigation. The moral calculus of whether national security interests justified this exploitation of innocent people remains contested. The end of the Cold War didn't end illegal agent programs. Both Russian and American intelligence services continue to maintain deep cover operatives, though methods have evolved with technology. Modern illegals might use digital identities, operate through social media, or exploit different vulnerabilities in increasingly connected societies. The fundamental challenge remains the same: creating and maintaining a convincing false identity in a target country while gathering intelligence and avoiding detection. Your story, though set in the 1950s, illustrates timeless elements of intelligence work: the stress of constant deception, the isolation of operating alone, the difficulty of maintaining cover under scrutiny, and the sudden endings that come without warning. These elements persist regardless of technological changes or geopolitical shifts. As you drift off tonight, consider the strange fate of those who lived these impossible lives. They weren't the glamorous spies of fiction, engaging in car chases and shootouts. They were people who mastered the mundane, who perfected ordinariness, who disappeared so thoroughly into fabricated identities that even they sometimes forgot who they really were. And when they were caught or suspected, they didn't disappear in dramatic fashion. They simply weren't there anymore. Houses emptied, jobs left vacant, church pews missing familiar faces. The people around them constructed explanations that made sense: moving for work, family emergencies, personal problems. The truth remained hidden behind classification stamps and official silence. If you found this journey through Cold War paranoia compelling, I'd really appreciate a like or subscribe. These stories of people who vanished into secret lives, who disappeared twice, once into false identities, and again when those identities collapsed, deserve to be remembered. Even if their names remain classified, their experiences illuminate a strange chapter of history when thousands of people lived completely fabricated lives in service to nations locked in ideological struggle. The Velvet Obscura will continue to explore these stories where people disappeared, sometimes by choice, sometimes by circumstance, always leaving questions that haunt those who knew them. Because the most unsettling disappearances aren't the dramatic ones that make headlines. They're the quiet erasures, the people who were there one day and simply weren't the next, leaving only the echo of a presence that was never quite real to begin with. Sleep well, and remember, the person living next door with the perfect lawn and friendly smile might be exactly who they claim. Or they might be someone else entirely, living a performance so complete that even they sometimes forget which version is real.